The autumn wind howled through the narrow streets of Brasov as Elena Varga fastened her wool coat and stepped into the fading light of dusk. The clinic behind her, modest and pale under the grey sky, had been her refuge for 3 years now, a place where she could offer comfort to the sick and forgotten. Today had been no different except for the blood donation she had made that afternoon. The nurse who drew her blood, an older woman with tired eyes, had smiled warmly and said her donation would help someone in desperate need. Elena had felt a quiet pride, the kind that came from knowing she had done something good without expecting anything in return. She walked home along the cobblestone path that wound past the old church, its Gothic spire piercing the low clouds like a silent prayer. The streets were emptying as twilight deepened, and the lamplighters moved slowly from post to post, igniting small flames that barely held back the encroaching dark. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The chill in the air was sharper than usual, carrying with it a strange heaviness, as though the night itself held its breath. Her small apartment was on the 3rd floor of a crumbling building that had seen better centuries. The wooden stairs creaked under her weight, and the smell of old stone and damp wool clung to the walls. She lit a candle on the windowsill and set a kettle on the stove, hoping tea would chase away the cold that had settled in her bones. As the water began to hiss and bubble, she stood by the window, looking out over the rooftops toward the distant mountains. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay Castle Dracula, a name whispered with dread by the villagers, a place where no one went willingly and from which few returned. Eleanor had heard the stories all her life. The Count, they said, was a creature of eternal night, a lord cursed to feed on the living, to wander the earth without rest or redemption. Some claimed he was a myth, a tale told to frighten children. Others swore they had seen his shadow gliding over the moors, heard his voice carried on the wind. Elena had never given much thought to such things. She believed in God, in kindness, in the power of human decency. Monsters, she thought, were made by men not born from darkness. The kettle screamed, jolting her from her thoughts. She poured the steaming water over dried chamomile and sat at the small wooden table, cradling the cup in her hands. The apartment was silent except for the faint crackling of the candle flame and the distant murmur of voices from the street below. She sipped her tea slowly, savoring the warmth, and allowed herself a rare moment of peace. Then came the knock. It was not loud, but it carried a weight that made her heart skip. 3 measured strikes against the door, deliberate and unhurried. Eleanor set down her cup and rose slowly, her pulse quickening. She was not expecting anyone. The landlord had already collected rent, and her few friends knew better than to visit after dark. She approached the door cautiously, her hand hovering over the latch. "Who is it?" she called softly. There was no answer, only silence. She hesitated, then unlatched the door and pulled it open just enough to peer through the gap. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by a single candle burning at the far end. Standing in the shadows was a man, tall and impossibly still, his face obscured by the high collar of a black cloak. For a moment Elena thought she had imagined him, a trick of the flickering light, but then he moved, stepping forward with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice low and smooth like velvet dragged over stone. "I have come to return something that belongs to you." Eleanor's breath caught. His eyes, visible now in the candlelight, were dark and fathomless, yet within them flickered something she could not name. Not malice, but something older, something weary. He extended one gloved hand, and in his palm rested a small glass vial filled with crimson liquid. "Your blood," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "You donated it this afternoon. I have returned it." Eleanor stared at the vial, her mind struggling to comprehend. "Why would you?" she began, but her voice faltered. She looked up at him, searching his face for some explanation, and found only a strange, melancholic intensity. "Because it is not for me to take," he said quietly. "Not like this. Not from you." She took the vial with trembling fingers, and as their hands nearly touched, she felt a coldness radiating from him, a chill that went deeper than winter. He stepped back, his cloak swirling around him like smoke, and for a moment she thought he would simply vanish into the dark. But he lingered, his eyes still fixed on her with an expression that was almost human. "Who are you?" she whispered. He did not answer immediately. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unbreakable. Then, with the faintest hint of sorrow, he spoke. "I am the shadow that haunts these mountains. I am the lord of a castle you have been taught to fear, and I am damned beyond redemption. But your blood, Miss Varga, it stirred something within me I thought long dead, something I should not feel." Eleanor's heart pounded. She knew without needing to ask who stood before her. The stories had not lied. Count Dracula was real, and he stood at her door, not as a monster demanding tribute, but as something far more unsettling, a creature burdened by his own existence. "Why return it?" she asked again, her voice barely audible. "Why not take what you need?" "Because," he said, his voice softening, "you gave it freely, and I have not been given anything freely in centuries. To take it now would be theft, and I am many things, Miss Varga, but I am not a thief of kindness." He turned then, moving toward the stairs with that same unnatural grace. Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the vial, her mind reeling. Before he disappeared into the shadows, he paused and looked back at her one last time. "I will not trouble you again," he said, "but know this. Your blood is unlike any I have encountered. It carries warmth, light, things I have no right to feel. For that I thank you, and I curse you, for you have reminded me of what I have lost." And then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness as though he had never been there at all. Eleanor closed the door slowly, her hands shaking. She set the vial on the table and stared at it, her mind a storm of confusion and fear. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the wind began to wail like a chorus of the damned. She did not sleep that night. She could not. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, seemed to carry his presence. She thought of his words, of the sorrow in his eyes, and she wondered if it was possible for something so cursed to still feel pain, to still long for redemption. And she wondered, with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold, why he had come to her, and whether he would truly stay away. The hours passed slowly, and when dawn finally broke over the rooftops, pale and grey, Elena rose from her chair and looked out the window. The city was waking, oblivious to the encounter that had taken place in the night. But she knew, with a certainty that unsettled her, that her life had changed. The Count had stepped into her world, and whether she willed it or not, she had stepped into his. She held the vial up to the morning light, watching the blood shimmer darkly within the glass, and somewhere deep in the mountains she imagined him standing alone in his ancient castle, staring out at the same rising sun he could never touch, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Elena tried to return to her ordinary life, but the encounter had left a mark deeper than she wanted to admit. At the clinic, she moved through her routines mechanically, changing bandages, administering medicine, offering comfort to the sick. Yet her thoughts drifted constantly to that night, to the tall figure in the doorway, to the sorrow in those ancient eyes. She told no one. Who would believe her? And even if they did, what would she say? That Count Dracula himself had come to her door, not to drain her life away, but to return what she had given freely. The vial remained on her table untouched. She could not bring herself to dispose of it, nor could she understand why she kept it. Perhaps it was proof that the encounter had been real, not some fever dream born of exhaustion and solitude. Each evening, as darkness fell, she found herself glancing toward the door, half expecting another knock. But the nights passed in silence, and slowly she began to convince herself that he had meant what he said. He would not trouble her again. A week after the first visit, autumn deepened its grip on Brasov. The trees along the hillsides blazed with amber and crimson before surrendering their leaves to the wind. The air grew colder, sharper, and the nights stretched longer. Elena lit her candle earlier each evening, drawing what warmth she could from its small flame. She had just finished preparing a simple dinner of bread and soup when the knock came again. This time she was not surprised. She had felt it somehow, a change in the air, a weight pressing against the walls. She set down her spoon and walked to the door, her heart steady despite the fear curling in her chest. She opened it without hesitation. He stood there as before, cloaked in black, his face pale as moonlight. But this time something was different. His posture was less rigid, his expression more uncertain, as though he himself did not fully understand why he had returned. "You said you would not trouble me again," Elena said quietly. "I did," he replied, his voice low. "And I meant it. Yet here I stand." Elena stepped aside, a gesture that surprised them both. "Come in," she said. "It is too cold to speak in the hallway." He hesitated, and for a moment she saw something almost like fear cross his features. Then, slowly, he stepped across the threshold. The air seemed to shift as he entered, growing heavier, colder. He moved to the center of the small room and stood there, looking strangely out of place among the simple furnishings, a relic from another age trapped in the present. Elena closed the door and turned to face him. She folded her arms, not from cold, but to steady herself. "Why have you come back?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. His gaze moved around the room, taking in the flickering candle, the modest table, the worn chair by the window. When his eyes finally returned to her, they held a vulnerability she had not expected. "Because I cannot forget," he said. "Your blood, it lingers in my mind, not as sustenance, but as a memory of something I lost centuries ago. Warmth, light, humanity. I have walked this earth for so long, Miss Varga, that I had forgotten such things existed. And now, because of you, I remember, and it torments me." Elena felt a strange pity rise within her, mingled with caution. She moved to the table and gestured toward the chair opposite hers. "Sit, if you wish," she said softly. He looked at the chair as though it were a foreign object. Then slowly, almost awkwardly, he sat. His movements were precise, controlled, yet there was something deeply unnatural about the way he held himself, as though his body remembered how to perform the actions, but no longer understood their purpose. "You speak of torment," Elena said, sitting across from him, "but you are the one who has the power. You could take whatever you wish. Why do you resist?" "Because I have taken for too long," he replied, his voice heavy with centuries of regret. "I have drained the innocent, the guilty, the brave, and the broken. I have fed on fear and desperation, and with each life I consumed, I felt myself slip further from what I once was. But your blood, freely given, it reminded me that kindness still exists, and that I am no longer worthy of it." Elena studied him in the candlelight. His face was beautiful in a cruel, timeless way, carved from marble and shadow. But beneath that inhuman perfection, she saw the weight of endless years, the exhaustion of an existence without end or meaning. She felt something stir within her, a compassion she knew was dangerous, yet could not suppress. "What were you?" she asked gently, "before the curse?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "A man," he said simply, "a nobleman, a warrior. I defended my people, my land. I believed in honor, in duty, in God. But pride and desperation led me down a path I cannot undo. I sought power to protect what I loved, and in doing so, I became the very thing I had fought against. I became a monster." Elena's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "And now," she asked, "what do you seek?" He turned his gaze back to her, and for the first time she saw tears glistening in those dark eyes, though they did not fall. "I do not know," he whispered. "Perhaps absolution. Perhaps only the memory of what it felt like to be human, even if just for a moment." They sat in silence, the only sound the faint crackling of the candle flame. Elena felt the pull of his sorrow, the weight of his isolation. She knew she should be afraid, should send him away, should lock her door and never open it again. But something within her refused. "You are still here," she said softly. "That means you have not given up entirely." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are kind," he said. "Dangerously so. Kindness is a weapon I have no defense against." Elena reached across the table, and before she could think better of it, placed her hand over his. His skin was cold, impossibly cold, like touching stone pulled from a frozen river. But she did not pull away. He stared at her hand, then slowly, hesitantly, turned his own to hold hers. His grip was gentle, trembling, as though he feared he might break her. I do not know what you are searching for, Elena said, her voice steady, but I will not turn you away, not yet. He closed his eyes, and a single tear finally escaped, trailing down his pale cheek like a scar. You should, he said. You should fear me, hate me. Perhaps, she replied, but I do not. They remained like that for a long moment, two souls caught between worlds, between damnation and hope. Finally, he released her hand and stood, his expression a mixture of gratitude and despair. I will go, he said, but I will return. I cannot help it. I know, Elena said. He moved toward the door, then paused. If danger comes because of me, he said quietly, I will protect you. That much I can promise. And then he was gone, slipping into the night like a shadow dissolving into darkness. Elena sat alone, her hand still tingling from his touch, her mind spinning. She knew she was walking a perilous path, but she could not turn back now. Something had begun between them, fragile and impossible, and she did not yet know if it would lead to salvation or ruin. Outside, the wind howled through the streets, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf cried out to the moon. Elena rose and locked the door, though she knew it would not keep him out if he chose to return. She blew out the candle and lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in many years she prayed, not for herself, but for the damned nobleman who sat alone in his castle, haunted by the memory of what he had lost, and tormented by the faint, flickering hope that he might one day be forgiven. The visits became a pattern, though never predictable. Some nights he came, some he did not. Elena never knew when to expect him, yet she found herself preparing nonetheless. She would light the candle earlier, brew extra tea, leave the door unlatched. They spoke of many things during those quiet hours, philosophy and history, memory and regret. He told her of battles fought centuries ago, of kingdoms risen and fallen, of loves lost to time and dust. She told him of her patience, of small kindnesses exchanged, of the simple joys she found in helping others heal. Slowly something shifted between them. The fear that had marked their first encounters gave way to a cautious intimacy. She learned that he could not enter without invitation, that crosses and holy water caused him pain, that sunlight would destroy him utterly. He learned that she had lost her parents young, that she had dedicated her life to nursing because she understood suffering, that she believed even the damned deserved compassion. They did not speak of love, for such a word seemed impossible between them, yet something deeper than mere fascination bound them together. But their fragile peace could not last. It was a cold evening in late October when the stranger arrived in Brasov. Elena first heard of him at the clinic, where whispers spread quickly among the staff. A priest had come from the east, they said, a man known for hunting creatures of darkness. Father Christian, they called him, a name spoken with both reverence and unease. He had tracked vampires across half of Europe, destroyed nests in Prague and Vienna, driven the undead from their hiding places with holy fire and unwavering faith. And now he had come to Transylvania, drawn by rumors of the oldest and most powerful vampire of all. Elena's blood ran cold when she heard the description. Tall and gaunt, with eyes like burning coals and a voice that rang with righteous fury, he carried a silver cross, a wooden stake, and a faith so absolute it bordered on madness. He had been seen at the church, speaking with the local priest, asking questions about disappearances, about strange occurrences, about the castle in the mountains. The townspeople, desperate for protection, had welcomed him eagerly. They wanted the curse lifted, the monster destroyed, the shadow that had haunted their land for generations finally banished. That evening Elena hurried home, her heart pounding. She had to warn him. She did not fully understand why she felt such urgency, only that the thought of him being destroyed filled her with a dread she could not name. She lit the candle and waited, pacing the small room, glancing repeatedly at the door. The hours stretched endlessly. He did not come. Just before midnight she heard footsteps on the stairs, but these were not his silent, gliding steps. These were heavy, deliberate, the boots of a man who walked without fear. The knock that followed was commanding, authoritative. Elena opened the door to find a man in black robes, a silver cross gleaming at his chest. His face was lean and hard, carved by years of righteous battle. His eyes, dark and intense, fixed on her with immediate suspicion. Miss Elena Varga, he said, his voice deep and resonant. I am Father Christian. I have come seeking information about the creature that plagues this region. Elena forced herself to remain calm. I am a nurse, Father, she said carefully. I tend to the sick. I know nothing of such things. His gaze did not waver. You were seen, he said slowly, purchasing extra candles, keeping late hours, leaving your door unlatched after dark. The people talk, Miss Varga. They wonder why a pious young woman would behave so strangely. Elena felt her pulse quicken. I often work late, she replied. The sick do not keep regular hours. Father Christian stepped closer, his presence filling the doorway. I have hunted the undead for 20 years, he said quietly. I know the signs of their influence, the way they corrupt the innocent, twist compassion into complicity. Tell me, child, has he come to you? Eleanor met his gaze steadily, though her heart raced. I do not know what you mean, she said. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, he said. But know this, the creature that haunts these mountains is not what it pretends to be. It may speak with eloquence, may feign sorrow and remorse, but it is damned beyond redemption. Its very existence is an affront to God, and anyone who aids it, knowingly or unknowingly, puts their immortal soul in jeopardy. He turned to leave, then paused. I will be watching, Miss Varga. For your sake, I hope you are telling the truth. Elena closed the door and leaned against it, her legs trembling. She knew the hunter would not give up easily. He would watch her, follow her, wait for any sign that would lead him to his prey. And if he discovered the truth, both she and Dracula would be in terrible danger. An hour later, the familiar knock came, soft and measured. Elena opened the door quickly, relief flooding through her. He stood there, his expression questioning. You must leave, she said urgently, pulling him inside. A hunter has come. Father Christian. He is searching for you. Dracula's face darkened. I know of him, he said quietly. He has destroyed many of my kind. He is relentless, faithful, and utterly without mercy. Then you must go, Elena insisted. Leave Transylvania. Find safety elsewhere. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. And leave you to face his suspicion alone, he asked. He will question you, threaten you, perhaps worse. I can manage, Elena said, though her voice wavered. No, Dracula said firmly. He moved to the window and looked out over the darkened city. I have run from hunters before. I have hidden, fought, destroyed those who sought to end me. But I am tired, Miss Varga, so very tired, and for the first time in centuries I have something I do not wish to lose. He turned to face her, and she saw in his eyes a fierce determination mixed with terrible sorrow. I will not let him harm you, he said, but you must understand what this means. If he discovers our connection, he will see you as corrupted, as an accomplice to evil. You will be in as much danger as I am. Elena stepped closer, her voice steady despite her fear. Then we must be careful, she said. We must find a way to protect each other. He reached out and gently touched her face, his cold fingers trembling against her warm skin. You are remarkable, he whispered, and I am damned for bringing this upon you. Before she could respond, a sound echoed from the street below, the toll of the church bell. It rang 13 times, an impossible number, a warning. Dracula's expression changed instantly, his features hardening. He is near, he said. He hunts tonight. Elena's breath caught. What will you do? What I have always done, he replied, moving toward the door. I will survive. But I will not kill him, not if I can avoid it. His death would bring others, and the cycle would continue endlessly. He paused at the threshold and looked back at her one last time. Lock your door, he said. Pray if you still can, and know that whatever happens, you have given me something I thought lost forever. Hope. And then he was gone, vanishing into the night. Elena stood alone, her heart heavy with dread. She moved to the window and looked out at the sleeping city, wondering where he had gone, whether he would survive the night, whether she would ever see him again. Far below, a figure in black robes emerged from the church, carrying a torch that burned with an unnatural white flame. Father Christian moved through the streets with purpose, his eyes scanning the shadows, his faith a weapon sharper than any blade. The hunt had begun, and Elena knew that before it ended, Blood would be spilled, choices would be made, and souls would be tested in ways neither light nor darkness could predict. She closed the curtain and knelt by her bed, clasping her hands in prayer. But the words would not come. Instead, she found herself whispering into the darkness, a plea not to God, but to the damned nobleman who had shown her that even monsters could still dream of redemption. "Please," she whispered, "please survive." Outside, the wind carried her words up into the mountains, toward the ancient castle where shadows gathered and waited, and where the oldest of curses prepared to face its greatest trial yet. The following days were marked by a tension that hung over Brasov like a shroud. Father Christian moved through the city with the certainty of divine purpose, questioning villagers, examining old records in the church archives, and walking the perimeter of the town each night with his torch held high. The people watched him with a mixture of hope and fear, grateful for his protection, yet unnerved by the zealous intensity that burned in his eyes. He spoke of the vampire as a cancer that had to be cut out, a darkness that had poisoned the land for too long. Eleanor continued her work at the clinic, but she felt the weight of the hunter's gaze upon her. Twice she caught him watching from across the street, his eyes fixed on her with an unsettling focus. She knew he suspected something, though he had not yet confronted her again. She moved carefully, maintaining her routines, speaking to no one of her nocturnal visitor, keeping her fear locked tightly within her chest. Dracula did not come for 3 nights. Elena told herself it was safer this way, that distance would protect them both, but the absence gnawed at her, filling her with a worry she could not rationalize. On the 4th night, unable to bear the silence any longer, she made a decision that would have seemed madness only weeks before. She would go to him. The path to Castle Dracula was one the villagers avoided, a winding trail that climbed through dense forest and over rocky ridges. Elena wrapped herself in her warmest cloak and carried a small lantern, though its light seemed pitiful against the vast darkness of the mountain night. The wind whispered through the bare branches above, and twice she heard the distant howl of wolves, a sound that made her quicken her pace despite her exhaustion. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the castle gates. They stood open. As though expecting her, the iron twisted into shapes that resembled tormented souls reaching toward heaven. Beyond them, a courtyard stretched empty and desolate, overgrown with dead vines and littered with fallen stone. The castle itself loomed against the starless sky, a monument to forgotten grandeur and endless night. Elena stepped through the gates, her lantern casting dancing shadows on the crumbling walls. The massive wooden doors of the main entrance stood slightly ajar, and from within came a faint glow, not of fire, but of something colder, more spectral. She pushed the door open and entered. The great hall was cavernous, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into darkness. Candles burned in ancient sconces, their flames unnaturally still, casting a pale light over dusty tapestries and broken furniture. At the far end of the hall, standing before a massive fireplace filled with cold ash, was Dracula. He turned as she entered, and for a moment she saw surprise flash across his features, followed quickly by something that looked like alarm. "You should not have come here," he said, his voice echoing in the empty space. Elena walked toward him, her footsteps loud on the stone floor. "I had to know you were safe," she replied. He moved to meet her, stopping a few paces away. His face was drawn, his expression troubled. "The hunter is relentless," he said. "He has been tracking me through the forest, setting traps blessed with holy water, marking the paths with crosses. He believes he is close. Then leave." Helena said urgently, "Go somewhere he cannot follow." "And where would that be?" Dracula asked quietly. "I have walked this earth for centuries, Miss Varga. There is nowhere left that does not carry the stain of my sins. Every land I have touched bears the scars of what I have done. I cannot outrun my own damnation." Elena felt frustration rise within her. "You speak as though you have already surrendered," she said, "as though you have given up." "Perhaps I have," he replied, turning away. "Perhaps that is what I deserve." She stepped closer, her voice sharp with emotion. "You told me you were tired of running, of hiding, of being what you are. You said I gave you hope. Was that a lie?" He spun to face her, and she saw anguish in his eyes. "It was not a lie," he said, his voice breaking. "But hope is a cruel thing for the damned. It makes the weight of existence heavier, not lighter. Before you, I had accepted what I was. I had embraced the darkness because it was all I had left. But now, when I look at you, I see what I could have been, what I can never be again, and it is unbearable." Elena reached out and took his cold hand in hers. "Then fight," she said fiercely. "Not for redemption if you believe that is impossible. Fight for the chance to be more than what you were. Fight because I believe you still can." He stared at her, his expression a war between despair and something fragile, something that looked almost like faith. "You ask the impossible," he whispered. "No," she said. "I ask you to try." Before he could respond, a sound shattered the moment. The great doors of the hall burst open, and Father Christian strode in, his silver cross held high, his torch blazing with holy fire. His eyes fixed on Elena and Dracula, and his face twisted with righteous fury. "Step away from the creature," he commanded, his voice booming through the hall. "It has corrupted you, child, but you can still be saved." Elena moved to stand between them, her heart pounding. "Father, please," she said. "You do not understand." "I understand perfectly," Christian said, advancing slowly. "I have seen this before. The vampire uses its false charm, its lies of remorse and sorrow to seduce the innocent. It is a predator, nothing more, and it must be destroyed." Dracula stepped forward, placing himself in front of Elena. "If you wish to destroy me, priest," he said quietly, "then do so. But leave her out of this. She is innocent." Christian's eyes narrowed. "Innocent," he spat. "She stands in your castle, defends your existence, has clearly allowed you into her home. She is complicit in your evil, whether she admits it or not." Elena felt anger flare within her. "I am guilty of compassion," she said sharply, "of seeing suffering and choosing not to look away. If that is a sin, Father, then I will answer for it before God, not you." The priest's face hardened. "You have been deceived, child. This creature has no soul. It cannot be saved, cannot be redeemed. Its very existence is a mockery of God's creation." "Then why does he suffer?" Elena demanded. "Why does he mourn what he has lost? Why does he feel guilt and sorrow if he is only a monster?" "Because it is part of the deception," Christian said coldly. "The devil himself can quote scripture. Evil takes many forms, and the most dangerous is the one that appears sympathetic." Dracula raised his hand, and his voice, though quiet, carried absolute authority. "Enough," he said. "You speak of me as though I am not here, as though I cannot hear my own damnation recited like a litany. You are right, priest. I am cursed, I am damned. I have committed horrors that would break a lesser man's mind to witness. But I will not allow you to harm her for the crime of showing me kindness." Christian raised his cross higher, and Dracula flinched, a hiss of pain escaping his lips as the holy symbol blazed brighter. "You will burn, creature," the priest intoned. "In the name of God, I cast you back into the pit from which you crawled." Elena stepped forward, placing herself directly between the cross and Dracula. "If you wish to destroy him," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "you will have to go through me." The hall fell silent. Father Christian stared at her, his face a mask of shock and anger. "Foolish girl," he said slowly, "you would damn yourself for this abomination?" "I would not stand by and watch murder be called righteousness," Elena replied. For a long moment no one moved. The candles flickered, casting wild shadows on the walls. Then, slowly, Christian lowered his cross. His expression was one of profound sorrow. "You have made your choice," he said quietly. "I pray you will come to see the error of it before it is too late. But know this, I will not give up. I will find a way to end this curse, with or without your cooperation." He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. At the threshold he paused and looked back. "The vampire will destroy you, child," he said. "Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow. But it is in his nature, and when he does, your blood will be on both your hands." Then he was gone, leaving Elena and Dracula alone in the cold hall. Elena turned to find Dracula watching her with an expression of wonder and despair. "You should not have done that," he said softly. "I could not do otherwise," she replied. He reached out and gently cupped her face, his touch impossibly cold yet somehow tender. "You have bound yourself to me now," he said. "In his eyes you are lost. And perhaps you are. Perhaps I will destroy you, as he said. Perhaps that is inevitable. Elena placed her hand over his. Then we will face that fate together, she said. But until that moment comes, I choose to believe there is another way. He closed his eyes, and a single tear traced down his pale cheek. You are either the bravest soul I have ever known, he whispered, or the most foolish. Perhaps both, she said with a sad smile. They stood together in the candle-lit darkness, two souls caught in an impossible bond. While outside the castle walls, the hunter waited and plotted, and the night stretched endlessly on, heavy with the weight of choices made and destinies yet unwritten. The night Elena stood between Father Christian and Dracula marked a turning point from which there could be no return. Word of her defiance spread through Brasov like wildfire, whispered in market squares and church pews. The nurse who had defended the vampire, the woman who had chosen darkness over light. Some pitied her, believing she had been bewitched. Others condemned her outright, calling her a traitor to God and humanity. The clinic asked her not to return, their voices apologetic but firm. Parents pulled their children away when she walked past. Even her few friends avoided her gaze. Elena found herself cast out, isolated in a way she had never experienced. Yet she did not regret her choice. She had seen the humanity flickering within Dracula's cursed existence, had witnessed his struggle against his own nature. If the world called that madness, then she would bear that judgment. She moved through the empty days with quiet dignity, and each night she returned to her small apartment and waited for him. Dracula came every evening now, no longer hiding, no longer pretending distance would protect either of them. They sat together in the candlelight, speaking less than before, their silences filled with an understanding words could not capture. He told her of his life before the curse, of a young nobleman who had loved deeply and lost everything to war and betrayal. She listened and wept for the man he had been, for the centuries of loneliness that had followed. One night, as winter's first snow began to fall outside her window, he took her hands in his and spoke with terrible honesty. You have given me something I thought impossible, he said, a reason to wish I could change. But wishing is not enough. The curse that binds me cannot be broken by will alone. I have tried, for centuries I have tried, and I have failed every time. I am bound to this existence, to this hunger, to this darkness, and the longer you remain tied to me, the more danger you face. Not just from the hunter, but from what I am. Eleanor squeezed his cold hands. Then we find another way, she said. There must be something, some ritual, some sacrifice that could free you. He shook his head slowly. I have searched for such answers my entire immortal life. Every ancient text, every forbidden ritual, every whispered legend, they all say the same thing. A vampire's curse can only be lifted by a willing sacrifice of pure innocence, offered freely with full knowledge of the cost. And even then, redemption is not guaranteed. The damned may simply cease to exist, erased from creation entirely. Elena felt her heart clench. Then that is what we must do, she said quietly. Dracula's eyes widened in horror. No, he said sharply, pulling his hands away. I will not allow it. I will not take your life, not even for this. It would not be taking, Elena said, her voice steady. It would be giving, freely, as I gave my blood that first day. And you would die, he said, his voice breaking. You would be gone. All the light you carry, all the kindness you have shown extinguished. For what? For a monster who does not deserve salvation. For a man who wants to be saved, Elena replied. There is a difference. They sat in anguished silence, the weight of the impossible choice hanging between them. Finally, Dracula rose and walked to the window, staring out at the falling snow. I have lived too long, he said softly. I have seen empires rise and crumble, watched generations pass like autumn leaves. I am tired, Miss Varga, so very tired, but I am also a coward, because even knowing what I am, even drowning in centuries of guilt, I am afraid to not exist, and I am more afraid of losing you. Elena stood and moved beside him. Then let us try, she said. Let us attempt the ritual, and if it fails, if you simply cease to exist, at least you will be free. And if it succeeds, if you are truly freed from the curse, then perhaps you can live as you were meant to, as a man, not a monster. He turned to her, and she saw tears streaming down his face, crystalline in the candlelight. "And if you die," he whispered, "if I destroy the only pure thing left in my world, then I die knowing I chose love over fear," Elena said. "I die having tried to save someone worth saving." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that spoke of centuries of loneliness. "You are either an angel or a fool," he said against her hair. "I am simply a woman who believes in redemption," she replied. The decision was made. They would attempt the ritual at dawn in the castle's ancient chapel, a place that had not seen worship in centuries. Father Christian, Dracula explained, would likely come. The hunter had been watching, waiting for his moment. If they were to do this, they would do it knowing the end could come in many forms. They traveled to the castle together through the snow-covered night. The forest was silent, the world holding its breath. When they reached the chapel, a small stone building attached to the castle's eastern wing, Dracula pushed open the heavy doors. Inside, dust and decay had claimed everything. The altar was cracked, the pews broken, the stained glass windows shattered. But as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, a strange beauty filled the space, a sense of sacred potential long dormant but not entirely dead. Dracula prepared the ritual with hands that trembled. He drew symbols on the floor in ash and blood, lit candles that had not burned in centuries, spoke words in languages older than memory. Elena stood at the center of the circle he had created, her heart calm despite what was to come. She had made her peace with this choice. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, Dracula knelt before her. "The ritual requires your blood," he said, his voice hollow, "and it requires my acceptance of judgment. If there is any mercy in creation, it will free me. If there is only justice, it will destroy me. Either way, you may be lost." "I understand," Elena said. "I am ready." He took her hand, and with a small blade made a careful cut across her palm. Blood welled up, crimson and bright. He pressed his own cut palm to hers, their blood mingling as he began to chant the ancient words. The air in the chapel grew heavy, electric. The candles flared brighter, their flames turning from orange to pure white. Elena felt warmth spreading through her, not painful but overwhelming, as though her very essence was being poured out. Dracula's form began to change. The pallor of his skin deepened, his body seeming to become translucent, caught between existence and oblivion. His eyes, fixed on hers, held both terror and hope. The words of the ritual built to a crescendo, and Elena felt herself growing weak, her knees buckling. At that moment, the chapel doors burst open. Father Christian stood in the entrance, his cross raised high, his face twisted with fury and anguish. "Stop this blasphemy," he roared, striding forward. But it was too late. The ritual had reached its climax. Light exploded from the circle, blinding and pure, filling the chapel with radiance that drove back every shadow. Christian fell to his knees, shielding his eyes. Elena felt herself falling, her vision dimming, her strength fading. The last thing she saw was Dracula's face, human and whole, the curse lifting from him like chains breaking, his expression one of wonder and grief and terrible, beautiful release. Then darkness took her. When Elena opened her eyes, she was lying on the chapel floor. Morning sunlight streamed through the broken windows, gentle and warm. She was alive. Her hand was bandaged, and her body ached with exhaustion, but she was breathing. She turned her head and saw Father Christian kneeling nearby, his face pale with shock, and beside her, sitting against the wall with his hand pressed to his chest, was a man. Not a vampire, not a creature of darkness. Simply a man, mortal and whole, weeping openly. "The curse," Dracula whispered, his voice fully human now, no longer carrying that otherworldly resonance. "It is broken. I can feel the sun. I can feel my heart beating. I am alive." Elena tried to sit up, and he moved quickly to help her, his touch warm for the first time. "You survived," he said, wonder in his voice. "The ritual should have taken you, but you survived." Father Christian spoke, his voice shaken. "It was an act of true sacrifice," he said quietly, "freely given with pure intent. Such offerings are not rejected by divine grace. They are transformed. You offered your life, child, and in doing so, You saved not only him, but yourself. You proved that love can indeed break the darkest curse." Elena looked at the man who had been Count Dracula, seeing him truly for the first time in daylight. He was still beautiful, still marked by centuries of memory, but human now, redeemed. "Are you free?" she asked softly. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I am free," he said, "and I am terrified. I do not know how to be simply a man anymore, but I want to learn, if you will help me." Elena took his hand, warm and alive in hers. "We will learn together," she said. Father Christian stood slowly, his expression complex, a mixture of awe and reluctant acceptance. "I do not understand what I have witnessed," he said, "but I cannot deny it. A miracle, or something like it." "You have been given a second chance," he said, looking at the former vampire. "Do not waste it." "I will not," the man replied, "I swear it." The three of them left the chapel together, stepping out into the winter morning. The snow had stopped, and the sky was clear and bright. The castle, seen in daylight, looked less like a monument to darkness and more like a relic of the past, something that could be transformed, rebuilt, given new purpose. Eleanor and the man who had been Dracula walked down the mountain path together, leaving the hunter to his prayers. They did not speak much, content simply to be alive, to breathe the cold air, to feel the sunlight on their skin. In the town below, word would spread of what had happened. Some would believe, others would doubt. But Eleanor knew the truth. Love had broken the curse. Sacrifice had brought redemption. And though the road ahead would not be easy, they would walk it together, two souls saved from darkness, learning to live in the light. In the years that followed, the man took a new name and a new life. He worked alongside Elena, helping the sick and forgotten, using his centuries of knowledge to heal rather than destroy. The castle was eventually opened as a hospital, its dark halls transformed into places of hope and recovery. Father Christian, changed by what he had witnessed, became an advocate for compassion over judgment, teaching that even the lost could be found if met with genuine love. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the candles were lit, Eleanor and the man who had once been Count Dracula would sit together, hands clasped, grateful for the miracle they had been given. Not the miracle of immortality or power, but the simple, profound miracle of being human, of being loved, and of being free. The curse was broken. The darkness had passed, and in its place something fragile and precious had grown, a love born from compassion, tested by sacrifice, and strong enough to redeem even the damned.